Hello, and welcome back to ManifestED. My name is Abby Frost, and I'm here with my co-host, Kylie Raven, today. Joining us is Dr. Mark Milliron, Senior Vice President and Executive Dean of the Teachers College at Western Governors University, or WGU. So before we dive in, if you're new to ManifestED, we use this channel to share our latest conversations with the best and innovative leaders across the entire education ecosystem, and we have one of those joining us today.
We are very excited, Mark, that you are here with us today. Folks, Mark is an author, a speaker, a consultant, and he works with institutions, foundations, corporations, and government agencies, all to innovate education. Beyond leading WGU's Teacher College in his spare time, and Mark, I'm unsure based on what I just said, how you have much spare time, but in his spare time, Mark sits on a number of boards and is a professor at UT's Austin College of Education. Mark, welcome. We're thrilled to have you.
Thanks, Kylie. Good to see you, Abby. Great to be in the mix.
Mark, look, education is your job. As I just mentioned, it is your spare time. We'd love to start out and kick off our conversation a little bit about by hearing a bit about your story. What fuels your passion for education and teaching our future leaders?
Yeah, it's always important to kind of understand how you got on the path you're on and why you're still traveling, right?
Yeah.
I'm pretty aware of that. I come from a family of 9 kids. I have an African-American brother, a Native American brother, and a Korean sister. In addition to that, we had 25 foster kids that came through my house during the time I was growing up. My mom was a special needs nurse and my dad was out of his mind. So we had a big, rowdy household. I was really the first one in my family. I was a third child, first one in the family to go on a higher ed journey.
Okay.
My dad was educated in the Navy. My mom was a vocational nurse. But to go on a traditional higher ed path, and if it wasn't for Mesa Community College, I would not be here. Mesa Community College was close by. It was something I was able to work while I went to school. Met great professors, great friends that really helped me kind of get on my pathway to possibility. It was so funny though. I kid you not, when I started at Mesa Community College, I didn't know what an AA was. I didn't know what an AS was. I kind of knew what BS was because I was totally faking it, right? And for me, that opened my pathway to possibility. I'm crystal clear. If it wasn't for Mesa Community College and the transfer relationship they had with ASU, I went to Arizona State, got my undergrad, got my master's, and went on and got my doctorate at UT Austin. I wouldn't be here. There's no doubt. And what was fascinating for me is watching the rest of my family, because after me, like my mom and dad were like, well, if Mark can do it, anybody can do it. So all the other kids have gotten degrees, right?
The backhanded compliment.
Yeah, well, it's funny because when I was at the Gates Foundation doing work with their post-secondary success initiative, we always talked about the disruption of cycles of poverty, disruptions, and the fact that if you can get somebody a post-secondary credential with a labor market value before the time they're 24, 25, you not only change their lives, you change the lives of their kids, of their extended family, and like it's a ripple effect.
Yeah.
And I lived it. I saw it happen with me and my family and everybody else in terms of the direction they're going. You fast forward to today where I have 4 kids, which my mom calls a starter family.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
But every one of my kids, the expectation from birth was that they were probably going into higher education, right? It's just very different. And so for me, I've gotten passionate about the idea of opening access pathways in the higher education. So the ideas of access, success, and equity are at the core of what I do, which is why I love WGU, because Western Governors University, that is what we're about. Our College of Education is now the #1 provider of degrees to students of color in the country. It is the largest college of education. It is this transformative tool to try to help change those kind of trajectories. The university itself is all about it. So yeah, I'm in the right place doing the right kind of work.
That's amazing, Mark. I really resonate with your story. Actually, I have 2 of my youngest siblings are adopted from Brazil when we lived there for 10 years, and just the the absolute transformation really through education, but also a stable home and love. I mean, there's a lot of other contributing factors for sure. And you get into that in your article, but I really resonate with that. And speaking of the article, I think a lot of that passion fueled what you published, and calling on educators, policymakers, community leaders in general on these 5 resolutions for 2022. And what I loved about what you published, and honestly what you've been saying for years, because I had tuned into a couple of different videos where you were speaking on YouTube, there's so much synergy to what we've been discussing on this channel and with various other education leaders on the need to act now to support the next 10 years. So to start getting into kind of the nitty gritty, I wanted to get into your first resolution about the need for reimagined learning models, because there are so many options, right? New curriculum, technologies, programs. So can you get a little bit more into, like, what are these new models that you're seeing taking off and being successful? And then maybe in areas where they're not taking off, like talking about why.
Yeah, the hardest thing about the pandemic, I think, there were so many hard things about the
Yeah.
pandemic, but one of the hardest things about the pandemic in the world of education was, there was a reaction, I think, with the emergency remote learning where there was a real difference between people who had spent the last 20 years doing deep work on digital learning, where they were able to move pretty quickly and do really expansive work. So the WGUs, the ASUs, the UCFs, in the higher ed space and in the K-12 space, it was like the global online academies and other people like that. For those who weren't as grounded in that kind of work, unfortunately, many of them took kind of very traditional things and just put it online, right? And so it was a lot of spray and pray online. It was a lot of Zoom classes that were just the same old broadcast strategy, worksheets online, and that kind of work. And unfortunately, people conflated emergency remote learning with the kind of dynamic, high quality digital learning that's been out there for some time. And now there are some people who think that's what online learning is, and it's not.
Yeah.
And one of the things we often say at Western Governors University, the least interesting thing about our model is that we're online. That is by far, I mean, it's the fact that our model, you get a personal mentor. You have deep understanding of what you're expected to learn, and we walk you through in a learning in a competency-based accelerated way that you're able to kind of progress at your own pace. You can accelerate, you can slow down, you get just-in-time support from course instructor, PhDs who come in and help you master content. You get a dedicated evaluators who come back and give you rich feedback. That kind of model is just very different than the traditional kind of worksheet experience that many students had and have. And unfortunately, the pandemic made that even more clear, and especially made it clear, and Kylie, Abby, you probably talked about this before, is with parents. I don't think a lot of parents realized how rote and routine and worksheet driven a lot of the instruction and their kids were getting was. And I think now, and just laid it bare. And many of them realized, wow, we could be doing a lot more with our kids. And I think a lot of educators said, hey, I want to do something different with these tools. Zoom gives me different tools. This Canvas resource gives me different tools. And a lot of really innovative educators began trying different things, like going gradeless, trying mastery-based learning, trying project-based, trying different ways of interacting with students. So for me, it's not about the modality work. It really is about the model. And I think the learning model strategies, and like we talk about it in the article, I point people to the Mastery Transcript Consortium, because that is a consortium of public schools and independent schools who've dedicated themselves to the idea of, hey, let's get rid of graded transcripts and let's create a tool that actually documents, here's what we want our students to learn, and here's the map that helps you kind of master those different concepts. And what's great is, in many ways, grades just create such a shame and blame cycle where students feel shame for not getting good grades, and people or they blame the teacher for them not getting good grades. So it's just a shame and blame cycle. It's not useful. Whereas I think competency-based, mastery-based, proficiency-based, whatever semantics you want to use on that, help a student. We call it a grace and challenge, where, hey, maybe you didn't make it on the first swing, but now we're going to challenge you to keep going, keep trying, keep learning, and you can master that content and go. That model alone it is fundamentally different. So we know in the article, I push people to look at the work of the Mastery Transcript Consortium, look at the work in the CBL community, the competency-based learning community, because I think that's one of the most transformational one. And I'm a huge fan, obviously, project-based learning and kind of other kinds of strategies. And I definitely want folks to look at all the tools. By the way, I'm a big fan of digital tools, online tools, but you know what? Sometimes it's really good to do deep face-to-face work. It is really you as an instructional guide thinking about, here are the tools at my disposal. Here are the learning needs. Here's a unique student with a specific challenge. Can we more personalize that and allow them to progress? And can we do this in kind of a more effective way? It all sounds great, by the way, but you have to do this at scale, which is where we as educators have to create the systems and processes. So motivated teachers have the tools and they have the incentives and they're paid the right way and they're incented the right way to do this kind of work. Students begin to fall in love with it, that kind of stuff.
And I'm curious. Oh, go ahead, Kylie.
Well, I was just going to say a little bit, Mark, about what you just said almost spans, I think, your first two resolutions, right? And one is that the catalyst for the digital conversations and making sure that advancement's happening. And that's what the Zooms and rethinking about what that infrastructure looks like. But the second piece is, I think, something that WGU has been thinking a lot about around this competency-based learning. That is actually just the pandemic opened a lot of folks' eyes to that. Like you said, the parents actually seeing what's going on there. I do want to stay on that piece a bit. A lot of what we're talking about as folks are reevaluating their education is, what does that education get them? We talk about it through the lens of like the ROI of a student's education. With the shift for competency-based learning, and let's say the shift away from grades, what does that look like to you in terms of connecting students to a job, a company, without a GPA, without a metric of a universal measurement there?
So it's a great conversation. And I think it's at the heart of the Mastery Transcript Consortium, because one of the things they've said is the universities have been involved from the very beginning, because the idea is, how do you replace the transcript? Because universities use think about this. All the grade is that course list, and those grades are a signal that tells somebody else this person has learned specific kinds of content. Our problem is grades is a really undefined, weak, in some ways troubling signal. And if we could create a deeper, richer signal that was probably more and easily readable and transferable between the sectors, good stuff can happen. So what they're trying to do with the Mastery Transcript Consortium is create a mastery transcript that can be mapped to by the innovators and the people who are learning, and then transmit that information directly to the university. And they even said, I think at one point, it has to be machine readable and it has to be available. Somebody can consume it in 18 seconds, right? That's how much they could know. So that's one. The other one I'll tell you that's really exciting that's going on out there, I think you all are even involved in this, is the Open Skills Network. And the Open Skills Network, the OSN, is saying, okay, here are the catalog skills that we really want in the people who are coming into our job categories, and degrees tell us directionality around these skills, but we'd also love even better signal on that if we can. And then how do we transmit that back to educational institutions so they know, hey, these are the kind of skills we want for these jobs? And so people will start building curriculum to those skills. They'll start transmitting those skills to employers. So the OSN network has exploded in the last 2 years. You've seen all kinds of employers coming in and educational institutions coming in, because this idea of a skills architecture that then it allows you to kind of guide the development of the learning outcomes and get innovative about, okay, if these are the learning outcomes and the skills, I'm going to innovate with these instructional strategies to help somebody master that. Let's communicate that to an employer. An employer knows these 5 people got it, right? And I'm going to be able to pull them in. So I think this is probably the direction we're going. I think it's going to be a crawl, walk, run with this, but I think there are already good signals out there around this. It also, but by the way, this goes back to that call out you made to the second resolution, the resolution around the digital infrastructure. Mastery transcript's not possible without digital tools. OSN's not possible without digital tools. The pandemic laid bare the digital divide is still real. There are low income and first generation students who have no access to the resources that they need, very limited access sometimes. And it's a huge barrier for many of those folks. I mean, think about this just in terms of textbooks, right? We've always had this problem in higher ed. In higher ed, textbooks are so expensive, they actually cost more than classes for some
Yes.
students.
Yeah.
And there are entire initiatives called, the Open Education Resources Movement, the OER movement, to try to create open, freely available resources, to try to obviate the need for them, because about half the students in higher ed don't buy the textbook for a whole host of reasons, right? Now in K-12, we've gotten away from that. What we've said is, hey, this is so important, and we can't base it. We're going to give every student the textbook for every class, right? For almost every public K-12, everybody gets a textbook. I would argue today, the everybody gets a textbook thing in education is digital access, because the access to the curriculum is access to the digital resources. If I can go on a virtual tour of the Louvre from rural Arkansas, right? If I can get, high speed interactive, games from NASA, right? And I'm in the middle of the inner city, that's a different experience for me as a student than if I don't have that digital access. So I think we've got to, as educators, have this conversation. And I got to give a call out to the NGA, the National Governors Association, Asa Hutchinson, this is his baby right now. They're really doing good work on this, and it's been a big thing for us at WGU.
Yes, absolutely. And I think a part of this is also just rooted in like data and accessibility of the data and surfacing of insights. You talked about that in another one of the YouTube videos that I watched, actually, on how important it is to not be surfacing that data and insights just to leadership, right? Like, you need to arm students and faculty with that. And I'm curious too, if you think some of that is like part of the structure that makes these institutions who leaned into the opportunity to innovate during the pandemic and build new systems and competencies to facilitate online learning or to facilitate change, if like that's kind of one of the core pieces that is needed.
Yeah, I do think so. I think we are going to have to create a digital architecture in our educational world that is just as important as our physical architecture. Because what we've learned is it is a continuity of learning strategy, right? Because we have students who, if they're traveling, if they're playing sports, if they're this or that, having a digital architecture to continue learning would be super useful. Having students who are sick not come into school when they're sick, right? Actually stay home, and if they want to stay connected. I have my youngest son is asthmatic, and when he has really bad asthma attacks, it scares the people in school, right? So even though they really want him in school, like if he goes and he's going to have an asthma, he knows he's having asthma issues at that point. They don't really want him there because they're going to panic him, and they're going to panic, and he's going to end up being sent home, and it's a bad cycle. So the better thing is keep him home for a week, let him get through the cycle, go through it, and then go back when he's ready. He doesn't want to get behind. And unfortunately for him, there are, challenges with some parts of the schooling where they don't have the digital architecture in place for him to be able to keep up. So what happens is by the time he goes back, he has to do all the makeup work, as opposed to being engaged in real time. Where if we have a digital architecture with a physical infrastructure, and I want to make sure people hear me, I value both. They're both amazing.
Absolutely.
Then you can do the both and on this one and really kind of power that up. And then you can capture the data, because by the way, if I'm face to face with you and you give me a good nonverbal signal that, I'm catching your attention, I keep leaning in. Same thing a teacher does, right? It's a signal that you're on track or off track. You want to get data, from students while they're doing digital things that tell you they're on track or off track, right? So again, you want to get that to the learners themselves, to the student, to the instructors. So we have some great opportunities. I just think we have more tools at our tips right now than we've ever had in human history. It's a kind of a tautology, but of course we do. And it's just now it's thinking about how can we be creative around it and do it in a way where we can roll it out to more and more diverse students.
And how to, I totally agree. And I think the big thing that we saw, so maybe I take a step back, we do research quarterly to dig into where student needs, challenges, perceptions. And we also last year did a biannual study to dig deeper on a leadership, administration, faculty perspective. And one of the things that we heard was a high percentage, roughly 40% of faculty members feeling like they're compromising on quality with the shift to learning modalities. And part of that was just driven by feeling like there's a lack of support, but then really like a lack of training. And so how are we harnessing all these different tools, because there are so many of them, but
Hey,
then
I gotta
making
tell
sure
you,
that
we had people specifically say they wanted a teacher from WGU because they had experienced online, high
yeah,
quality digital,
yeah.
right? So Maureen Stover, who won the North Carolina Teacher of the Year in 2000, like she came from Western Governors, and she even said in one of the interviews with her is like, when the pandemic hit and we had to go online, everybody else was kind of panicking. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I know what this looks like. I know what it's supposed to look like. She was able to lean into it. So I do think we in the colleges of education need to make sure our learners, we want to champion next generation learning. To champion next generation learning, guess what? They have to experience next generation learning, right? So
So true.
that's what we have to own. So I'll give you an example. One of the things we did, because demonstration teaching, student teaching was tough during the pandemic, right? Trying to get clinical sites is tough because people are closed in and out. We partnered with a virtual reality partner named Immersion, and we created VR simulations for things like IEPs with, special needs students or disciplinary issues, whatever it was. And we had students in these VR environments.
That's
And what we
awesome.
found out, by the way, is not only did they get to experience the software and develop it, but we found out a huge value. These are high stress clinical environments, and this gives them the ability to walk in a fail safe environment and get reps where you can't really do that live. So we've actually, we did it for this reason, which was because of the demonstration teaching shortages in the clinical sites. But what we've learned is, wow, this really works, especially for fail safe, in creating that fail-safe learning environment. So we're fully integrating it into our learning experience now, so that every one of our teachers comes out having experienced VR, AR before they hit the ground. That's what we're talking about.
I love that.
It's very cool. Mark, on the digital component of it, and even as we're educating teachers, I look forward to the day in which we're talking about this as being the norm. And I think you said it in the article, like the investment in digital and during the pandemic really separated the maybe haves from have-nots. And we have to get on that equal playing field. And so I think COVID was probably a forcing multiplier for a lot of folks to invest in digital or have that wake-up call. But there's quite a bit more to do on it. And a big piece of it, while we focused on the students, is for the teachers. A bit of what you just said. How do we actually get them that training? And on that note, I want to jump to your resolution about finding the balance of educator self-care and professional development. Because we've all seen the numerous headlines that there's a teacher shortage, and it's for multiple reasons. It's burnout. It's that they're going to corporate jobs with greater flexibility and pay. And, we don't necessarily need to go through the reasons why, but I would love to hear your philosophy on what we should do about it in the next 5 years. And I think the example you just gave is a good one on how you're actually preparing your teachers before they go into the environment in advance.
So it's one of the things we have to be real clear about is to do the work we're doing. If you're going to be a great teacher in the classroom, you have to meet students where they are, understand their backgrounds, see them as human beings, and empathize and connect, and then take them where the direction they need to go. Same thing with rising teachers. And one of the things we have to be crystal clear on right now, we do a lot of para-pro to teacher initiatives. We do a lot of work with rising teachers. And so we partner with well over 2,500 school districts around the country with our clinical sites and with our kind of instructional work. Right. There is a lot of trauma in the education world right now. They have been through a lot. And I think sometimes there's throwaway lines about self-care and, hey, take some time for yourself and do yoga or whatever it is. And it's insulting, right? A lot of these teachers, it's been traumatic, and it's been traumatic. And there's this thing called emotional contagion where they have taken on the angst of their kids, of the parents, of the communities in the middle of a political maelstrom, right? Where they suddenly get thrown in the middle of all that. So this has been tough. I mean, this context is really tough. So in that resolution, we were talking about the idea that we absolutely want our teachers to get on learning paths. There's something healing about learning itself, right? As you're
Mm,
doing it,
yeah.
but also realizing that you want to create a healthy learning environment. We talked about that idea of healthy learning, and
Mhm.
our conception of that is really kind of pulling together the best of the work you might do on DEI,
Hmm.
SEL, basic needs, mental health, maybe even character education, and pulling that together and saying, how do you create a healthy environment where people can rise and thrive and do their best work, which isn't
Hmm.
simple. And that really was a call that was not an easy answer resolution. It was buckle up and take the time to understand and appreciate the challenges our educators have been through, and let's
Yeah.
start figuring out the professional development paths that make the most sense. Some might need behavioral health counseling right now.
Mm,
Others are ready to jump right into doing digital resource training, whatever it might be. But we've got to find the balance in this and not assume it's one or the other. Because, by the way, not everyone, it's just like our kids are in different places. I was in a classroom recently where it was hilarious. The kids are like, "Let's go!" Like we're there's
yeah.
no no trauma in that classroom. But there are others where they've been through a whole lot, right? Same thing, I
Hmm.
think, with teachers. There are some who are just like eager, get me into the next thing. Others need to take a beat, which is why
Yeah.
we're seeing the data around people considering leaving the education space, because
Hmm.
it's just been hard. Same thing with nurses, by the way. I feel for that. Our
Yeah.
nursing college has really wrestled with that in the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah. We saw that in that research that I mentioned earlier. I mean, the single biggest motivator for a faculty member was student success. Yet all of these social, political, I mean, there are so many of those challenges kind of made it feel insurmountable to drive and deliver that student success. And then there was just such high burnout rates coming through in the
Yeah.
survey results.
Yeah, and it's one
So
of those things where we want that profession to be honored, valued, well paid, well supported as
yep.
people are going through it. I have a daughter who's going on to be a teacher,
Yeah.
and I got to tell you, there's something about, like, I have never been more angry, probably as angry, but not more angry. But when she's a straight A student, she is a
Hmm.
rock star. I just really am proud of Alexandra. And when people say, "Well, you're too smart to be a teacher. Why don't you do X, Y, or Z?"
Yeah.
And,
Wow.
and it's not once, it's not twice, it is a bunch of times.
Mhm.
And that's where, like, we have got to get our arms around this. We have
Hmm.
got to create a pathway where the best and the brightest want to go into this field. Yes, because they can make a difference. Yes, because there are clearly altruistic,
Mhm.
life-changing work you're doing, but we've also got to make sure where it's well resourced, where
Yeah.
they're well supported, where they're well trained, right? It really is about making this a profession worth devoting your life to, right? If you're
Hmm.
going to do it in the right way, that's got to be part of this conversation as well. It can't just be all about the new and the novel. It's got to be about how you do some of the blocking and tackling.
No, and
Yeah.
I hope that the policymakers are all listening to this, because it can be arguably one of the most important career paths and highest points of influence. Yeah, and to make sure that they're incentivized and rewarded and supported is going to be critical, I think, for
Yeah.
that group going
And
forward.
there's nobody on the planet. We are one of the top STEM producing teachers of STEM in the country. Like
Mhm.
1 out of 4 graduate teachers, teachers who've gotten graduate degrees in STEM come out of our university. We're all about it. But you know what? You can't be all STEM all day, right? You've got to
Hmm.
be thinking about lots of other professions if you're going to be doing this, and really understand teaching and leading in the world of education is a glorious profession. You are absolutely changing the lives of kids. You are supporting communities. You are the backbones of states. You are what drives the nation. We've got to figure out how we create the infrastructure where it is
Yeah.
a job where you can do your life's best work and not have it be considered something that it's less than.
Right.
Hmm.
Sorry, I
Yeah.
was a little passionate about that.
No, I completely,
Rightfully
I
so.
completely agree. I
Mhm.
think the thing that keeps on popping up into my mind is like, how do we gauge if we're headed in the right direction on systems changing to be able to do that? I mean, I think right now we're all really focused or reading the headlines about teacher shortage, and we know some of the things that need to change, but it's like, is there enough momentum and like catalyst behind that? And I think uh, maybe a little bit more time is needed to see if we are truly like headed in that
So
direction.
I'm a big believer in this idea that I do not want to go back to normal.
Yeah.
Normal was not working for a lot of people.
Yes.
Right.
And I don't want to go to new normal, because new normal is generally bolt-on strategies or policies to what we were already doing. Like, I'm a big believer. I love Hans Rosling. Hans Rosling passed away recently, but he was one of the most interesting kind of good troublemakers on the planet. And he wrote a book called Factfulness. And in this book, he talked about how the data shows big things can change in big ways for the positive. And he's talking about global poverty and a host of other things that have happened in the last 100 years or so. But one of the things he pointed out was, he said, I hate when people call me an optimist. He said, I'm not an optimist. That sounds silly. That sounds foolish. He goes, I'm a possibilist. Because if I look at the data and I say, if we do X, Y, and Z, there's a pathway for this to be possible, right? We can get on this pathway. And again, you look at the whole initiatives around global hunger that started, with the end of poverty from Jeffrey Sachs in the middle 2000s. They dropped, extreme poverty rates in the world by almost 20 points, in the course of 20 years. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
But so I'm a big believer we should be thinking about a new possible, right? Instead of the new normal, what's the new possible? And I think getting what we learned, let's take what we learned from the people who've been innovating for the last 20 years. Let's take the energy from the people who just innovated for the last 2, right? And we're trying to, and let's listen carefully to what people need in these diverse communities that were not being well served. And let's reimagine, right?
Yeah.
And think about what we can do to pull it together, and then go the possibilist route, which is build a crawl, walk, run strategy, which means the policy work, the pay work, the infrastructure work to kind of move us in that direction. And if we can lean on learning and just say, hey, let's really focus on who the students are and are they learning and are they progressing as one of the key guides, good stuff can happen.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think I want to dig into a piece of that, which I think WGU has innovated on really well. And clearly there are really great things coming out of this, but you had mentioned as part of this conversation, healthy learning. And I guess I'm curious if you think that's part of WGU's kind of secret sauce, being able to harness social and emotional learning, even just from the online perspective.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
As I said before, the least interesting thing about Western Governors University is that we leverage online tools, right? Yeah. Again, our college is deeply hybrid. We have clinical placements all over the country. People are learning in person at the same time they're doing online. The thing that's really neat about our model is learning leads the way. Is, are you learning? Are you progressing? We are competency, learning centered progression, whatever you want to call it. But the really neat thing is that we have kind of this specialty faculty model that creates a community of care. And that community of care means every student gets a mentor that stays with them from the first contact to the time they cross the stage. And that faculty mentor is their guide and their direct, and they meet with them almost every week, having a conversation about where they are, what they're learning, where they're going. They get this whole family of course instructors who come in and come out based on what they're learning and when they're learning it. We have separate faculty who do nothing but evaluation. They're trained in rich feedback. They're all about trying to figure out how they can get the right feedback to that student, make it fair, make it accurate, make it helpful, make it supportive. And then we've got specialty faculty who are all about designing the best courses possible, the most interactive courses possible. And all of this is wrapped around our students and anchored in the strategies around social emotional learning and other kinds of support, even to the point where our college has rolled out these things called study halls, where we do these on-demand, live action study halls where students who are studying the same thing get into a digital room together. And what the students tell us is, one, it doesn't matter where they are in the country, they feel like they're in a community because there's 25, 30 other people learning that same thing at the same time, even if they go into a digital study hall. And then second, they can literally raise their hand and somebody will help them in that moment get past the sticking point.
That's awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where leveraging the tools to be deeply personal and being deeply learning centered, that's our secret sauce. I mean, that's our secret sauce. It has nothing to do with about being online.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's such the key, the deep personalization, for sure. So, Thanks for sharing a little bit deeper view into like that structure that enables it.
Yeah. And by the way, just, this is our 25th anniversary.
Yes.
WGU has gone from a crazy idea to, 260,000 graduates,
Yeah.
130,000 students. And it's just amazing. And I would encourage anybody to check out one of our commencements. We have 6 live commencements coming up this
Mhm.
year, and then we have all the virtual commencements, but it is amazingly inspirational to see these students who are people go, oh, it's an online university. This is a personal university. You're going to
Yeah.
see students who are calling out and connecting with their mentors in deep and rich ways. It's really powerful.
But it's also not just something that is like WGU is holding for itself, right? I mean, something that you also talk about in the article or in the resolutions is around partnerships and how important these
Yep.
are. I mean, Teachers College, I think you called out over 2,600 partnerships with different school districts across the country. And there was this quote, I actually wrote it down. We need to get over our better than argument and embrace our better with reality that we're all in this. Like, I absolutely loved that. And I think one of the things that folks tuning in might be curious is like, what's working well with all of these
Yeah.
partnerships to drive more of that scale and impact, which I know WGU is really passionate about.
So we're a national university, but we're deeply local. So we are divided into 7 regions, and each one of our regional vice presidents work directly with specific states. We have 11 affiliate states that are deep
Mhm.
connections into WGU.
Right.
Because what we have learned is we really care about low income, first generation, diverse students who are going to be successful in higher ed. We care about all our learners, but we have a special focus around underserved populations. And what we have learned is that those students often stay within 50 miles of where they were born for most of their lives. So they live in a regional education ecosystem. So the action is in partnership and connection with that. So
Mm.
we've got the school district partnerships. We've got 500 community college partnerships where we transfer our ticket. We're like the number one transfer institution in the country for community college students. And what we know is you got to get over yourself. We have so many people who are busy talking about how great their model is versus this. No, we're right for a specific student at a specific time, and we want to be a part of that ecosystem. Concrete example, my executive assistant is an amazing woman named Dee Carver. Dee got her undergraduate degree at UNC Chapel Hill. She loved being at Chapel Hill, and everything about it was fantastic. When it was time for her to get her master's degree, she was living in the mountains of Western North Carolina. She could not commute down there, and she couldn't find another university that was going to work for her within the state. She ended up getting her MBA with Western Governors University because it worked for her in that moment at that time. And so I would argue WGU in that exact example is an active part of a educational ecosystem making the state better. Dee was able to survive, thrive, and rise, right? Because of the educational options that were available to her. And that's where if we can get our early learning, our K-12, our community colleges, our universities to partner and connect and make it simpler and easier, especially for low income and first generation students to traverse those paths,
Yeah.
I think good stuff can happen. I do think that's going to mean smart policy from states. It's going to mean really good incentive structures for people to collaborate with each other.
Mhm.
But I do think that action is local, right? So
Yeah.
we fully understand we want to play in all those parts.
And it starts local, right? But one of the silver linings about COVID is the reduced barriers and the possibilities of growing and going beyond, I think, what was possible before. And so, Mark, I want to, as we wrap up, I want to maybe take that with us, right? This is all about the possibilities, and no longer does that need to be the silly optimism word. It actually can be just a motivation for rethinking and actually taking action on it. Before we close out on the note of possibilities, you mentioned WGU assigns students mentors throughout their career. Sometimes you get those mentors through your school, sometimes they're in your family, sometimes they're your dad. I'd like to go back to your daughter,
Yes.
who you mentioned is at UT Austin as where you're a professor. And I think you have a fun little story there that we'd love to share with the larger group here.
Yeah, I just think it's a neat kind of exemplar of kind of what we've lived through in the last couple of years. Alexandra, in the middle of all the pandemic, we have a couple of members of our family that are pretty, had immunocompromised issues and health issues. So we had to be really careful, especially in
Mhm.
that first year. So we locked down pretty hard and we had to go into Western North Carolina. Alex decided to take a gap year because of that and came back and helped with the family. So our whole family was together, which was really neat, even though it is a starter family. It was great. Very happy to get them all together. And during that phase, one of the things Alex and I decided to do was I really wanted her to experience writing a book. And so she had just got done with a class on early childhood development. So we decided to write a children's book. And so we went through the whole process of kind of visioning it, writing it out, sending it out for review, pulling it back. Long story short, we ended up writing a book called The Sugar Chair Stories, which is out and available on Amazon if people want to pull it in. But The Sugar Chair Stories is based on this story from a dear friend of our families. And we actually used the sugar chair in our family when Alex was growing up. A woman named Becky Hodges, who was a kindergarten teacher and a primary teacher in Alabama. And she used to use this thing called the sugar chair instead of timeout. And the sugar chair idea was instead of going into timeout, you had to go to the sugar chair, or you got to go to the sugar chair. And the sugar chair idea was had a rhythm. You slow down, you look around, you figure out how to sweeten things up. And you get out of the chair when you figure out how to sweeten things up. And it kind of teaches kids the rhythm of slowing your world down, introspection and reflection,
Mhm.
empathy, kind of seeing it through other people's eyes. That's the look around part. And then figuring out how to sweeten things up, which is kind of growth mindset and goal setting,
Yeah.
right? In terms of where they're going. And the book follows this young girl and her puppy as they kind of grow up together with a sugar chair. And you get the idea. In the beginning, she kind of has to go in the sugar chair, but by the time she's older, she wants to
Mm.
find a sugar chair. And
Yeah.
the sugar chair can be anywhere. It can be on your deck. It can be whatever it is. But the idea is you want to get to a place where you can slow down, look around, figure
Yeah.
out how to sweeten things up. There's something good with that. And I would argue it's where we are in the world of education. We're in a
Mm.
moment right now where we need to, okay, we need to slow this down for a second. We need to see this through the eyes of other people, see it through our and understand what's going on. And now let's do some work around that new possible. Let's figure out how we can sweeten things up and try to help this so that more and more diverse people can be more successful
Mhm.
than ever before on educational pathways.
Mhm.
People don't go through educational pathways just to get degrees. They go through educational pathways to change their lives.
Yeah.
So we want to be a part of that, which is why it's a good thing. Thanks for letting me be a part of the conversation, folks.
Oh my gosh, this was so
Great.
much fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, thank you very, very much. I hope we're going to see you stand up and it's going to say sugar chair across,
Uh,
across the back there.
the book
But
is actually right back there.
I love it.
we'll take that note with us. Mark, thank you, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in. For more conversations like this, like below and subscribe, and we will see you all soon.